Between August and November 1888, Jack the Ripper, a pseudonymous killer, murdered at least 5 women in or around the Whitechapel neighborhood of London's East End. The case is one of the most famous mysteries in English criminal history. A dozen killings were speculatively linked to Jack the Ripper between 1888 and 1892, but only 5 of them, all committed in 1888, were traced by police to a single murderer. Marianne Nichols, whose body was discovered on August 31st, she was lying on her back, her legs were straight out, and her skirts were raised almost over her waist. Charles Cross reached out and touched her face, which was warm, and her hands, which were cold and limp. "I believe she is dead," he observed. Robert Paul, meanwhile, placed his hand on the woman's chest and thought he felt a slight movement. "I think she's breathing," he said, "but very little if she is." Annie Chapman, found September 8th. Whatever the source of the altercation, Annie Chapman spent her final days bruised and in pain, her health rapidly failing. When she saw her friend Amelia Palmer on Dorset Street on Monday, September 3rd, the bruising to her right temple was obvious. "How did you get that?" Amelia Palmer asked. Annie responded by opening her dress and revealing the bruises on her chest. Amelia spotted Annie in Dorset Street again 3 days later, about 5 p.m. on September 7th. She seemed significantly worse and claimed to be too ill to do anything. Amelia passed her again 10 minutes later, and she was still standing in the same spot. However, she was now desperately trying to lift her spirits. "It's no use giving in. I must pull myself together and get some money or I shall have no lodgings," Annie Chapman said the last time Amelia Palmer heard her. Elizabeth Stride, found September 30th, at 12:30 am on his route, William Smith spotted a man and a lady on the opposite side of the road near Duffield's yard, where Elizabeth Stride's body was later discovered. The man was 28 years old, had a dark complexion, and a little dark mustache. He stood around 5 feet 7 inches tall and wore a black overcoat, a heavy, felt deerstalker, a dark hat, and dark clothes. The woman, subsequently identified as Elizabeth Stride, was wearing a flower pinned to her jacket. Smith's suspicions were not raised by the couple's actions, so he continued on his patrol, staying ahead into Commercial Road. Catherine, Kate, Eddowes, found September 30th, walked towards Houndsditch. HUD eventually estimated that it would have taken her around 8 minutes of ordinary walking to reach Mitre Square, during which time the killer of Elizabeth Stride was also walking in the other way. Mary Jane Kelly, found November 9th, Barnett indicated in his inquest statement that Mary Kelly was last seen alive between 7:30 and 7:45 p.m. on Thursday night before she was killed. "I spent approximately an hour with her." This might be taken as his arriving between 7:30 and 7:45 or leaving between 7:30 and 7:45. He most likely meant the latter, given that he mentioned it was the last time he saw her alive and that he was with her for nearly an hour. These were the official 5 victims. According to popular belief at the time, all of the victims were prostitutes, and all but one, Kelly, was murdered while begging on the street. In a radical departure from the genre, British social historian Hallie Rubenhold argued in The 5, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper, 2019, that Nichols, Chapman, and Eddowes were not prostitutes, that Stride had resorted to soliciting only occasionally, during periods of desperate poverty and emotional suffering, but there is no evidence that she was soliciting when she was murdered, and that the only verifiable prostitute according to Rubenhold, the perception that Jack the Ripper was a murderer of prostitutes arose as a result of the Victorian era's sexist and class-based stereotypes. In each case, the victim's throat was cut, and the corpse was generally mangled in a way that indicated the killer knew something about human anatomy. In one case, the police received half of a human kidney that had been taken from a murder victim. The authorities also received a series of taunting messages from a man claiming to be Jack the Ripper and claiming to be the killer. Attempts were made to identify and apprehend the murderer, but they were futile. The inability to apprehend the killer sparked widespread public outrage, prompting the Home Secretary and the London Police Commissioner to quit. The killings of Jack the Ripper abruptly ceased in the fall of 1888, but London citizens continued to seek answers that did not arrive, even more than a century later. The continuing case, which has generated an industry of books, films, TV series, and historical tours, has encountered several challenges, including a lack of proof, a slew of disinformation and false testimony, and strict Scotland Yard restrictions. For more than 120 years, Jack the Ripper has been the subject of news articles, and he will most certainly continue to be for decades to come.